All right. We left some time, and that's an overview so you understand the False Claims Act. But we really are trying to figure out, what are the creative ways to proceed here. And we have such a unique environment. We've never seen the level of hospital fraud that we see now. We've never seen this level of vaccine injury. And we've been talking among ourselves and frankly, among the vaccine injured, among the people who've lost loved ones by hospitals about what we can do. And frankly, I've had to rejigger my brain. I'm in a pattern. It's all well-worn pathways. And Catherine Hewitt certainly helped me see things a little differently, that we have this incredible resource out here of people. She's focused on the people. And she's like, these people, they don't necessarily understand that, and you don't understand them necessarily. And then we got the experts and these issues that are going on, and that we've got to gain understanding. So one of the pathways, and we'll just have a conversation among ourselves, and let's put it this way. You have a question, just stand up, get to the mic. You can interrupt us at this point. This is just a conversation from here on. So I've got a couple of things I want to say, but I'm going to recognize you. Stay at the mic. We're going to go. But a couple of the pathways that we've looked at by the people themselves provide the ability to whistleblow because they got medical records themselves that prove the fraud. So if we can work with those records in a way that's economical and helps put it into a structure, we can actually build fraud cases. We can build fraud cases for failure of hospitals to report VAERS reports, which 2,800 hospitals didn't make proper VAERS reports. That's all the hospitals, by the way. Remdesivir, they say remdesivir is very frustrating. We know it killed people, but it's a PrEP Act countermeasure. So they're immune from, they have no liability there. But if somebody got remdesivir prior to June of 2023 and they had kidney or liver disease, well, it was contraindicated at least up to that date. It's an unnecessary medical treatment, and Jeremy was listed that in one of his listings. So it's a way that if families and if the information can be handled in such a way, and it's a work in progress, and we need your help. We need you data people, we need you hospital people, and we need the victims. This is how victims can fight. So, go ahead.
Comment on the idea that we can prove some of our cases. We gain so much information from people. It's amazing how much I've learned and how much I've confirmed just by reading Twitter. By the way, I don't have a Twitter account. I use Knitter, so they can't track what it is I'm looking at. But I can read stuff, and obviously a lot of people put whatever they want on there. So I read whatever they want, including a bunch of trolls. But there's plenty of gems of information. And so that somebody with knowledge about what is and isn't important can use this collective consciousness, this sort of digitalization of a communal effort to try to prove things, including especially the problems with the COVID science, quote unquote. And so it's really made all of my cases, anything involving COVID, has been so much benefited by just having other people talk, even if it's crap. I can tell what's good and what isn't. And this Brooke Jackson's case, we haven't got document 1 from defendants yet in discovery. And we could prove our case better than any case that's ever been a False Claims Act case, including those that are brought by the government. We have more information. We can already identify the specific files and the ways in which they lied about the vaccine injuries that were happening in the treatment group, how they manipulated the inclusion and exclusion factors to get their desired results. Stuff that I would have wanted to try to prove if we ever could get their data and hire experts to figure it all out. It's already known. So all the work that we all do in this space makes it it makes all of us and individually more powerful, more knowledgeable, more successful.
David?
Yeah, so I have a gem of information, and Warner, I emailed you about this, but I think everybody could benefit from this. One of our plaintiffs is a we have a lot of nurses that are our clients, but one says she was working in the ER, and she knows with personal knowledge that they were supposed to put the COVID patients in a negative pressure air room, and there's a specific charge for that to the government. And she knows that the government was charged for this, but the patients were in the hallway.
Love it. Love it.
So, but that's the gem.
Let's go get
But
it.
it's not enough. So she's not the person that does the billing. She has personal information, but she doesn't bill. Somebody else bills. So who's the person that we need to get to, and what documentation do we need to support this?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question, and it's actually a kind of a complex and long-winded answer, which I'm not going to give you right now. What I'm going to tell you is we are going to set up, just like we have our Monday meetings, and we have the third Thursdays with the doctors, third Thursdays evenings, doctors, come on, talk whatever you want to talk about. We're going to do a False Claims Act meeting. It may start out once a month, but you can come and we can have a discussion about that. But back to your question, we can build off the information that your nurse knows. We can try to reach out. We do need to see that it was billed. We need to show that it was paid and that it's material. The same stuff you heard Jeremy talking about. When you have a nurse or somebody who comes forward like that, there are ways to build up that data. She knows other people in the hospital, for example, and they may be helpful. I don't know. And there's some other things I don't want to talk about publicly. Next.
Thank you, Ray Flores. I wanted to comment that I loved what you were saying about the United States knowing this information already. And I remember about a year and a half ago, you had announced that the United States government was not intervening because this was information that they already knew. I believe I'm correct on what you said. What I want to know is, how does that play into any kind of conspiracy between the government and Pfizer? And could you elaborate on exactly what they knew?
Well, I want to talk about how the relationship with the government in all of these False Claims Act cases. My first exposure to the False Claims Act case, one of my first, was against Lockheed Missiles and Space Company. And the relator, the whistleblower, had filed a lawsuit under seal. The government went to interview our client in jail. He was in jail on an unrelated, with Lockheed's lawyers with present, and we weren't even told about it. So they're having ex parte communications with our client. We didn't even know about it. The defendant, they're supposed to be investigating the defendant. That's why it's under seal. So I thought from the beginning that the government was always going to be on the side of the defendant, and that when I was going to take on this case, I was going to be litigating against both, even though I was supposed to be representing the government's interest. But after many years in this practice, I realized that actually there are many government lawyers that are really good and that are trying to do right. Some of them are self-interested. They want to have some success in their careers. So I think in terms of Brooks' case, they filed a statement of interest supporting Pfizer's motion to dismiss the original complaint. And that's rare when the government files in support of the defendant's motion to dismiss. And the judge at our hearing on May 1st in Beaumont, Texas, commented how strange it was to see the government sitting on the same side as the courtroom with the defendant. Usually they're on the same side as the relator. And he said it spoke volumes. And so I think in the government's statement of interest on the first motion to dismiss, they never like to come right out and say you can't sue and that we're all wrong, because they rely upon this law. And if they destroy the law when it's Brooke bringing it, then they're going to hurt their own cause. So they actually filled a very nice brief that explained exactly what we needed to allege in order to have a good claim against Pfizer. And so when the government dismissed our case, we filed a motion for reconsideration. And
I just want to make sure we're clear. When the court the court ruled against us a year ago, and the court dismissed our case.
The court dismissed our case.
You said the government.
Oh, sorry.
This time, because we're facing the government now, the court still has to decide. That's what we're fighting about now.
Okay, so when the court dismissed our case, we then said, Judge, we want to amend the complaint and plead the theory that we are presenting, which is fraud in the inducement of either the contract, or really it's fraud in the inducement of the emergency use authorization. And getting the EUA authorization was a material component of the contract. So it's fraud to get them to basically make a payment on the contract. And we basically used the government's statement against our case as the roadmap on how to win. And the judge agreed with us and allowed us to file an amended complaint. And so we went from a notice to appeal in the Fifth Circuit, and now we're back litigating it. The next time around, the government filed their own motion to dismiss, and without really any explanation. They have to have some statement in there. They said the case is against public health policy because their national public health policy is that the vaccine is safe. Well, you know, that's not a policy. That's just corruption. And Rick wasn't here. Jim wasn't able to make it today. But he was quick to point out that actually our national public policy is to protect against fraud and to protect whistleblowers that come forward with that kind of fraud. So with that kind of knowledge. So basically, the government is now trying to get our case dismissed. The judge, we had a wonderful argument where it's in the hands of the judge, and we're hoping for a good ruling.
And if you guys are interested in the case documents, they're at iambrookjackson.com, and Deb Conrad's documents are at iamdebconrad.com. Have I got that right? What's the next question here?
Oh, Robert, did you have an answer for me on that? Oh, just one. This case will litigate, in addition to everything else it's litigating, are there any limits on the government's right to intervene and dismiss? The Supreme Court sort of liberalized that standard, but are there no limits? Because here the government has a clear conflict of interest. The claim is brought on behalf of the people of the United States of America, because that's who the government truly is. And the government likes to say, no, it's whoever is the bureaucrat who happens to be in charge. And prior courts have said there's a limitation to the government's right to dismiss when it could potentially impact things like conflicts of interest. Maybe the government is in bed with the conflicted parties. Here, that's clearly the case. Independent of whether you think the government knew certain things about the safety or efficacy of the vaccine, what is indisputable is that the government mandated this. This administration did. So does this administration want the world to find out they've tried to force a drug that was dangerous and ineffective for years? Obviously not. It's against their political self-interest to do so. So we're going to find out, are there any limitations to the government dismissing these cases?
Rachel?
Yeah. Rachel Rodriguez. I have a comment. I just wanted to thank you for mentioning the criminal investigation, and I thought everybody would be encouraged to hear. We've now submitted requests for criminal investigation in our third state, which is Louisiana, and my understanding is that the new AG there does have vaccine injury in her family from the COVID vaccine. So I think that there's really some positive outcome there. But to the point of the panel, the only reason that we started doing this in Florida is we found I had consulted with a very experienced Mendenhall attorney, because I was getting a lot of calls into my office about the hospital homicide. And we basically determined that in Florida, the state law was going to prohibit doing anything. The state had lowered the statute of limitations to 1 year. In 1 year, most of the families are just now getting past a grief stage and starting to look at their records. And furthermore, we just did some other investigations. So this was a creative outlet to say, okay, PrEP isn't going to stop us on asking for criminal investigation. We also figured that the states are the only ones that are going to investigate this, because the feds are clearly not going to investigate themselves. And another creative maneuver that we did is we added in the administrators of the hospitals together with some of the federal officers that we know were promulgating these policies and guidance and whatever the heck that was. So we're very excited about that. And thanks to you, we're going to start looking at states that also have the, I guess, private citizens can bring claims, because we'd like to see this happening all across the country. We believe that this will give a lot of encouragement to people. We also see it as a critical mass question, who's going to break first? And very, very shortly, we're going to be bringing more whistleblower affidavits. They've contacted us from EcoHealth Alliance, and Mimi, who's been working with me on this, Dr. Miller, her father, has also written an affidavit. So we're going to pursue that as supplemental filings in these states. Pretty exciting.
And Rachel, one of the things about Florida is, and we were going to mention this, so I'll mention it, it has a state-level False Claims Act. So despite our issues with the federal government and the current administration and the current, attorney general, you have state attorney generals. And some of these so-called friendly states have state False Claims Act, and there are ways to do it under the state False Claims Act as well. So just be aware that I think it's about 30 states now.
Yeah, and the other way to think about this is because a lot of people are like, okay, the feds paid for this, so how is there a state False Claim Act? Two things. One, there's been increased Medicaid reimbursement for the vaccine. That's going to implicate every single state. The second aspect is look at your state pension fund. Like, this has come up in other contexts, BlackRock disputes and the like. But a lot of these state pension funds may have been invested in Pfizer stock, may have been invested in Moderna stock, and may have lost money because of the fraud on the public market that both Pfizer and Moderna engaged in by withholding information from the public to inflate the value of their stock. That may have diminished the value of the pension fund. That is, in fact, a potential False Claims Act claim. So be creative and inventive at the way you can actually get recovery and stop the fraud.
I'm sorry. This is exactly why we need to have regular meetings. I mean, we're not, this sounds complex. Oh, it's complex, but we can work through it. We've been down a lot of roads, and we really, really want to share whatever we can to help people, because there is no way. We've got $1 trillion that should be recovered, frankly. I do estimate that as the level of fraud that we've got right now under the pandemic. So there's a lot of money out there. We got to figure out ways to do it. And believe me, three of us ain't going to get all that. We need help. We need help. So we need the attorneys. You got ideas. We got ideas. And the pension funds, and we have an ERISA idea, and we have some other things. And the ERISA, by the way, looks really good. There's 600,000 companies in the United States. So we're very interested in these. Go ahead, Jeremy. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, in addition, and there's two states that have, it's Illinois and California. They have a insurance fraud statute that allows qui tam actions for fraud or false claims on private insurers. So any sort of medical care that goes to a private insurer can be sued, and they have a 50% share or a 40% share if the states intervene. So this is a fantastic area that is still expanding, that we're still trying to wrap our minds around.
Mimi, did you have something?
Yes, just very quick. So my background is in criminal prosecution, which is part of kind of why we're putting these briefs together, because I'm a little familiar with how to actually put people in jail. So part of what we're doing as well is reviewing as many states' criminal codes as we can and putting together some ideas of charges that could be applicable for COVID crimes. So if anyone is interested in petitioning their state AGs, we're very small. It's just us. And so anyone that would like to be involved, I'm happy to share any research that we have. We're happy to share our briefs. This is not something that you have to stick closely to. We're happy to share information to whoever would like it.
Mimi, I want to say something to you about that. Listen, and to everybody, and sometimes I forget this, but there is a crossover between criminal and civil. Fraud is usually a crime. Under most state statutes, federal statutes, it's also a crime. These companies like Pfizer, pay people off to avoid the crime. And Pfizer, in its last $1 billion settlement, actually set up a brand new company to plead guilty to the crime. And then that company pled guilty, but not the main company. So that's But I just want people to be aware. Fraud, we're talking fraud civilly, but it's also a crime. Just think about that.
In fact, the False Claims Act has a provision that is called the alternate remedy provision, so that a lot of times relators file their complaint under seal. The government may not intervene, but they'll go ahead and criminally prosecute based upon the information provided, and then they'll collect money through a restitution. And if you're the whistleblower and your lawyer needs to go in to the court and say, this is an alternate remedy on our claim, and make sure that the whistleblower gets her share.
And just two added components. One, remember there's also retaliatory discharge claims and termination and violation of public policy that can be brought if a whistleblower suffers adverse employment consequences. And in all these criminal cases that we're talking about as a potential revenue or potential means, remember you have different decision makers. The State False Claims Act, okay, you're going to the state attorney general, right? Can you find one that is willing to be on board? Maybe that's Louisiana, maybe that's Florida, maybe that's Texas, depending on the state, depending on the laws. The same is true at the criminal level. You can find local prosecutors in any county in the country. And, we've seen the, Democrats choose a very aggressive legal lawfare approach towards President Trump. But what it opened the door to is, well, okay, anybody can go shopping for a prosecutor. And that means we can go shopping for a prosecutor. And maybe a smart, politically ambitious prosecutor is willing to take on Pfizer in their local county that might be a very different political profile than the political decision makers in the Biden Justice Department.
Joe?
Great. Thanks a lot. Joe Gomes from Honolulu. First of all, thanks. A shout out to Viva Barnes local community. Thank you very much, Bob, for what you do. Excellent stuff. My question is probably similar to the first question, and it is, who can be a plaintiff in a false claims case? Does it have to be a whistleblower, or can Joe Q Public through FOIA or
great question? Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Anyone can be a whistleblower. Anyone can be. We call them relators, actually. So you're a relator. You have to be an original source of the information, which means basically that it's non-public information, or if it's public information, you're adding to that information in a way that's non-obvious. If you're able to do that, you can bring a False Claims Act yourself. And that's kind of what we're saying about the victims. This is why the victims are so powerful here, because they have non-public private information that creates what's called this original source. They can be their own original sources and come together and go after these hospitals. And it's not minor. I mean, one of the individual cases, individual people that I'd like to do something for, we looked at the medical record, and they spent $600,000 killing her husband at that hospital. So I think that that hospital was fraudulent in its treatment, and that $600,000 times 3 ought to be recovered for his widow, as well as my attorney fees, and you'll help me with that. So, all right, I hope that answers the question. Next.
Can I just add real quickly? The law is written that you don't have to have any original source knowledge unless it's publicly disclosed. So, but the truth is the courts really they don't like it when somebody doesn't really have any of their own information. So it's best to have somebody who at least can, what Warner said, that has some connection to some information that can make it work. Because usually there's a certain amount of publicly disclosed information anyways.
And Freedom Council itself, I mean, really, Freedom Council itself as an entity is working on these processes so that the processes will be able to happen, and individuals who want to plug in their data and provide their data to see if it matches up with one of these potential targets. And there are some targets. We are thinking differently. This is the different thinking. We literally can pick a target, and then we may need to make a little noise around the target and see what shakes loose. And then those people can be the relators. Go ahead. Is that Ann?
Yeah, Annie. Hi, Warner. Hey. So I want to make a little noise. And I live in the state of Minnesota, and they are trying to require, and I don't know if it went through, that all the daycares in the state of Minnesota, because we're a liberal state, are requiring for any children that are in daycares to be vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And so my neighbor just told me, they're not, I shouldn't say, I'm not going to talk about them, but there's a lot of daycares that are going to close down because they do not want to go under that mandate. And so that's happening right now in Minnesota. And I don't know if there's something you could do about that, but it's happening.
Annie, I think that's really interesting. Please send me that law, and we ought to have a discussion about that, and let's get some Minnesota lawyers in the discussion. So, Catherine, let's set up a call about that through Freedom Counsel so that we can have a discussion about that. Because I mean, you know what I feel about it, but we do need to make noise. Noise matters right now.
So you stay through the where the water he doesn't celebrate that.
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat this so that they can hear it on the video later. It's for the COVID vaccine, quote unquote, for children, which is ridiculous. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll just piggyback on that too. My sister-in-law runs a home daycare, and she got like pages and pages of all the changes they're trying to do with home daycares, and she's not going to be able to afford it and do all that needs to be done. So she's going to have to shut down. So they're trying to shut down these home daycares for lots of reasons, which is unfortunate. And they're going after the homeschool families. And
we have some people here with some big platforms, and they're usually dealing with adult issues, but maybe we need to have a childhood issue.
Well, and I think that's another issue. That's a good place to coordinate with Children's Health Defense, which has been the leader in all of this. Because we've got to continue to figure out all the creative ways that they're going to come at this, that they're going to try to use subterfuge to force it on. I mean, the other way they're trying to do it right now is through the food supply. Bird flu suddenly is magically dangerous, but only dangerous to raw milk. So, I mean, it was like the pandemic. The virus knew, don't go into Costco, don't go into Amazon, but do go into the mom and pop shop. Do go into the church people singing a hymnal. That's where they're doing the same nonsense again. I mean, they're even trying to introduce the vaccine to us through the food supply without our informed consent. I mean, they can't. Bill Gates of the world are never going to stop. And maybe that's something else we can look at is, ways to sue some of those people. So is there any way to sue Anthony Fauci now that it's been documented all the different fraud he was personally participating in?
Yeah.
Well, the answer is yes, and we'll talk about it more.
Yeah. So my question actually is for you, Bob. So my dad was killed. I'm also from Minnesota, so my dad was killed in a Minnesota hospital. We help run a group there. And I heard you talking about you were doing polling through your law firm with the vaccines. Have you or would you consider doing polling about, do you know someone who was killed in a hospital? Do you know someone who died of COVID? Or do you know someone who survived a hospital? These survivors, they know they were tied down, they're speaking. So would you be willing to do that, something like that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We're going to continue to do public opinion surveys, because what surprised me was that this was not fully recognized. And talking to legislators and congressmen and other people, Thomas Massie had an idea it was popular, but he didn't know the scale of it. But other people thought, oh, this is a non-issue. There are people who are apologizing for President Trump still taking dumb positions on some of these issues. And I was like, these are losing issues. The one issue, the only way he could frankly blow his campaign is if he cedes ground to Robert Kennedy on these issues. Robert Kennedy's on the right side of food freedom, right side of medical freedom, right side of financial freedom, right side of political freedom. And if Trump wants to blow up his campaign by still running on the Fauci ticket, have at it, but that's politically unpopular. I was running into people close in Trump world who really thought, oh, no, the vaccine's really popular. The normies love it. The normies really believe it. They think it saved lives. I was like, I don't think so. And so we're going to continue to do these surveys because it educates. We're going to cite the surveys in a court case that we have in Pennsylvania on the food freedom issue. Just to remind, but judges are starting to figure it out. I mean, one of the mistakes they made was if you're going to do this sort of mass vaccination experimentation on the public, probably give a saline to the celebrities, to the billionaires, to the multimillionaires. You know, don't give them the drug so that their kids, their family, their friends are suffering. One of the mistakes they made is they didn't limit it. They disparately impacted working class and poor people in this country, but they didn't limit it to them. And so unlike eugenics, which mostly managed to be successful because of the class and racial prejudice that it employed, that's why they're losing people in high-ranking positions. That's why they're getting dissidents in surprising places. That's why we have allies like Kennedy's vice presidential candidate, someone who 5 years ago was nowhere near this line of logic and now is. And why? It's because of what she witnessed during COVID. So we're going to continue to do the public opinion surveys because, and wherever it's helpful or useful to any specific state law, to any specific state policy. But things like what they're pushing through of forcing daycares to close, by the way, this would disproportionately impact the African-American community in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So it'll disproportionately impact some of those communities. And that's one of the biggest things we found in the poll about COVID vaccine injury and disability and discrimination, is it disproportionately impacted the African-American and Latino communities in this country. And maybe that's why they're now politically anchorless. So, yeah, we'll absolutely keep doing that.
Steve?
This is a comment. Since we've been talking the last few minutes, especially about the COVID-19 vaccine, I wanted to make a comment about the LA school district case because I think that there's already a lot of misunderstanding going around, including headlines about that case and what the Ninth Circuit did or did not say. The Ninth Circuit in that case did not rule that COVID-19 shots are not vaccines. What that circuit court said was the plaintiffs in their lawsuit allege that the COVID-19 vaccines do not prevent the transmission and that they are not vaccines, they are medical treatments. And why that's significant, if you accept the truth of that, is that it takes the case out of the Jacobson analysis and puts it into a Cruzan analysis of the right to refuse medical treatment. So the Ninth Circuit decision is an extremely important decision because it reversed the motion to dismiss and it said there's a legal theory here that the plaintiffs are going to be allowed to pursue. But the Ninth Circuit did not make any substantive rulings on the merits.
You're right, but they had to assume the facts that were alleged to be true. And
well, that's precisely right. They assume the truth of the plaintiff's allegations. They don't make a ruling.
But they made a ruling that if you assume those truths, you state a claim, and we will prove those truths. That is exactly the point. These things are gene therapies. They were developed and put into labeled vaccines because the gene therapies failed for decades. For decades, all the animals died during the treatment, during the pre-clinical trial research.
Russ?
All right. I just want to ask actually a False Claims Act question, and I do not know the answer, but I do know that there was a lot of ESSER money and a lot of ARP money. They went a lot of places.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I mean, look what your school district did. Look what they certified. Look how they breached the certifications.
So is a FOIA?
Is
there something we should be digging out and saying, wow, you really found this by FOIA?
Yeah, state records law is not covered by that public disclosure issue, by the way. And you've got, with school boards in particular, what I find is you often have members that will support what you're doing on that board. You'll have a dissident member. You might even have a majority. Right now, we got a few that are majority. They're calling us for representation of the board. But no, those funds are, and look at the contractors. Maybe it's not the board. Maybe it's the contractor that ripped off the board of its federal funds. Those contractors are out there doing all kinds of craziness.
We need to have a separate meeting on this, obviously.
What's
if you're going to have meetings, I think you need to include ESSER and ARP when we do these.
All right. Listen, let's take one more question. We got to close this down, and I have an announcement. Let me do an announcement, too.
So my question goes to the food issue and putting these gene therapies into our food system without informed consent. Do we know of anyone that's been injured by that process yet? And if so, what sort of claims could we bring on behalf of those individuals?
I mean, it's going to be the people who are going to be initiating the legal claims are going to be farmers who want to challenge and contest and question this. For example, they're also putting on a surveillance grid through the supposed dangers of the bird flu. In Michigan, imposing, you got to tell us everybody who comes into contact anywhere on your farm. Tell us their name, their background, et cetera. And it's like, this is a massive control grid effort.
And they're tracking the cows or want to track the cows. Track your animals.
Yeah. Put an electronic chip in the animals.
Hey, we got a lot of fights ahead of us, don't we? It's going to be a ball. Let's, we are done, basically, with this session. I do want to say the CLEs, we are filing for CLEs, you guys. It took a while last year. It'll take a while this year, but there are sign-up sheets on your way in and out. So make sure you're signed in the hours that you attended these talks, because we're going to get CLE. Also, there are file folders with documentation. I told you about I am Brooke Jackson and I am Deb Conrad. Well, there's also there's a folder. I don't know where that is. I am Freedom Counsel, maybe. But there's a folder that will have the documents that will back up just some simple cases. I have a simple outline of the False Claims Act that'll be in there for you. There's going to be the PPP case, a very simple PPP case that we won, that the federal government intervened in. It's a tiny case, but they popped in on that one. But PPP fraud is everywhere. EIDL fraud everywhere. Small Business Administration fraud everywhere. It's unbelievable. It's one of the SBA Inspector General told me it's like shooting fish in the barrel. So just open your eyes to these possibilities. Join us in our meeting that we're going to start planning to share what we know. And let's go get these bastards.